Hey you guys, gals, and bums, welcome back to A Few Bad Men. Today, we have episode 1 of Murder Incorporated. But first thing you gotta do is you gotta take that subscribe button for a one-way ride. Leave them in the streets and send a message to everybody else, all right? Then we gotta deal with that thumbhead bastard. Make sure he's eating through a straw for the next few weeks, okay? Without further ado, let's get right into it. A Few Bad Men presents Murder Incorporated, Episode 1, The King of Brownsville. Abe Reles was born on May 10th, 1906 in Manhattan or Brooklyn. I ain't sure. But what I do know is that he died on Coney Island on November 12th, 1941, after taking a swan dive out of a 6th floor window at a Half Moon Hotel. In those 35 years, Abraham Reles would bring nothing but pain, misery, suffering, and death. If a total stranger walked up to Abe Reles and punched him square in the face, I could totally understand. That is what Burton Turkis, the district attorney who prosecuted the Murder Incorporated case, had to say about the man known as Kid Twist. Even his friends disliked him. He was the type of guy to walk into a diner and stick his thumb into a total stranger's soup and walk off laughing. He took the name Kid Twist from Max Kid Twist Wyback. I did a video on Max a few months ago. Go check it out if you haven't seen it. He was a Jewish gangster from the Lower East Side, who ironically died on Coney Island as well. Although Kid Twist never did an honest day's work in his life, he loved to flash big wads of cash, always with a fresh $1,000 note on top, but he always insisted that his pals pick up the check. He was a snorer, a miser, a moocher, a deadbeat. As an adult, Abe wasn't a big guy. He stood about 5'6", weighed about 135 pounds, but he had the arms and the hands of a man much bigger than him. His arms hung well below his knees, and his thick hands with fat fingers were extremely strong. He had a speech impediment that made his D's and Do's more pronounced. Even though Abe dropped out of school in his early teens, he always felt like he was the smartest man in the room. He felt he was a match for any detective, prosecutor, or judge, and especially other gangsters. On one account has him outsmarting a foe named Jake the Painter. Jake and Abe were sworn enemies. They both vowed to kill each other on sight. On one evening in September 1932, Jake the Painter caught Abe without his piece. Jake drew his weapon, but before he could let the kid have it, Abe said, "What do you want to kill me here for? My guys are only going to kill you later." Jake responded, "They'll have to get me first." "They will," replied Abe. He said, "There's plenty of business to go around. But with the way you know the painting business, we could make a killing. Why don't we talk it over like some smart businessmen? Let me buy you a drink." After a few drinks, the pair walked out of the bar as pals and partners. Then Abe said, "Hey, you know, you shouldn't have that gun. What if the cops catch you?" "What's the difference?" replied Jake. Abe said, "The difference is we're working together now, and if you get caught with a gun, you'll have a record, and you won't be able to be the clean front man for the business. Give me the gun, and I'll hide it for you." Jake said, "You're always thinking with your head," and he handed Abe the gun. Abe calmly accepted it, and just as calmly, shots rang out. Abe shot Jake several times in the gut, threw the gun in the sewer, and ran off. When he got around the corner and out of the sight of any witnesses, he began to act drunk, falling into a storefront window, smashing it, and was arrested for public drunkenness. He was in the station when the body was found with a perfect alibi. That is what Burton Turkis said. I don't know how true it is, but it shows the cunning way Abe operated in the streets of Brownsville. Abe grew up in Brownsville, one of those Brooklyn neighborhoods that sprang up after the completion of the Williamsburg Bridge that connected the Lower East Side with Brooklyn. Many Irish, Italian, and Jewish families left the slums of the Lower East Side and moved to Brooklyn, hoping for a better life. But so many Jewish families settled in Brooklyn that by the late teens and early 20s, it was every bit the slum that the Lower East Side was. Maybe worse. Most of the apartments had no sewage or decent drains, and the unpaved streets became mud holes when it rained, and they were filled with all kinds of filth, including horse manure and people manure. The Jewish criminal also made their way to Brownsville. Criminals roamed with impunity and could be found on any number of corners. If you needed somebody to bust a head, go to the corner. You got a job and you need a driver, go to the corner. You need to bust a union, set a fire, bump a guy off, go to the corner. Brownsville was a breeding ground for criminals. It was in these filthy, crime-ridden streets that Abe Reles would spend most of his time. By the time he was 14, he was already beyond the point of no return. He was a product of his environment. He was hanging around the pool halls and on the corners, learning from the older gangsters. At the age of 15, Abe got his first pinch. He was arrested for theft and for being a juvenile delinquent. He was sent to juvenile facility for 5 months. On May 6, 1923, Abe Reles was riding a motorcycle when he lost control of the machine and struck a woman named Mrs. Fannie McLean as she stood on the corner of Bedford Avenue and Hawthorne Street. With no mercy for his victim, Abe jumped back on his bike and took off. He was arrested the next day. He told the police sand had gotten into his eyes and he lost control. He said that he got scared and ran off. Reles was given a suspended sentence in June of 1924. In August of 1924, Abe and a few of his pals were arrested after cops found them with their pockets overflowing with nickels. The boys had been breaking into vending machines on the train platform. He received another suspended sentence. On March 4th, 1925, Abe and a pal named Solomon Gorlin went to a room being rented by a pretty 17 or 18-year-old dancer named Ethel Horan. Abe had rented the room with Ethel a few days before as husband and wife. The owner of the house heard the pair arguing the previous 2 nights, and when Abe and Solomon came to see her, the two again began to argue, this time about her missing an appointment. Then the fight turned physical. When Ethel refused Abe's demand for money, shots rang out. Abe pulled a .38 revolver and fired once, hitting the young dancer in the chest. She was taken to the hospital and was in critical condition. She survived. Abe was found crouching on a roof at 852 Blake Street. So if you're reading between the lines, this is Abe trying to pimp this young lady out, and she wasn't having it, and he shot her. That's basically what happened. Abe was brought up on assault and white slavery charges. In May of that year, he was sentenced by Judge Taylor of the city court to that great institution for criminal higher learning, Elmira Reformatory. In 1927, Abe Reles had returned to Brownsville with a bachelor in gangsterism. On December 22nd, 1927, he was arrested with a 17-year-old kid who gave his name to the police as Harry Toffin. The young pair were arrested for robbing a pool hall at 31 Powell Street. Abe and young Harry were accused of walking into the pool room on December 16th and relieving the patrons of their watches and cash, making off with around $500. But Abe had found his get-out-of-jail-free card. That was the attorney to the gangsters, Samuel Leibowitz. The high-priced mouthpiece got the men off on acquittal. In May of 1928, Abe was again arrested, this time for a robbery that happened before the pool hall robbery. All right. On November 22nd, 1927, Abe and 4 others entered a garage at 403 Snydeker Avenue, and they pulled guns on Penselly Johnson, the night watchman, tied him to a chair in the back office, and drove off with a truckload of dolls. After being arrested, Reles admitted to being the one who shoved the gun into Johnson's back. But when he took the stand, he said the confession was beaten out of him by the police, and he feared for his life if he didn't admit to the crime. Even though Johnson positively identified Abe as one of the men who robbed the garage, a jury found Reles not guilty and he walked free. At this point, Abe had a crew of at least 7 guys, one of them being a black guy named Ernest Johnson, and they were stealing everything they could in Brooklyn. The 8 men were arrested on June 23, 1928, after being recognized by a police officer as wanted men when they passed him in a taxi as he drove through Brooklyn. The officer called for backup, and the detectives approached the vehicle with their guns drawn. The police arrested Abe, who was using the alias Reles, spelled R-E-L-L-I-S, along with Harry Strauss, Martin Goldstein, using one of his aliases, Max Goldstein. Also arrested were Jack Markowitz, 24, Isidore Gottlieb, 32, William Davison, 22, Harry Gortoff, 23, and Ernest Johnson, 25. The men were charged for the May 1st robbery of a doctor's office in which $250 and a gold watch were stolen. Johnson was given an additional charge of grand larceny for being in possession of a pair of shoes reported stolen by a salesman. On June 25th, the case was dismissed. Abe was again arrested on August 25th of 1928 for burglary. The charges were reduced to disorderly conduct, and he was sentenced to 6 months in the city prison. I guess he got a suspended sentence because less than 6 months later, on October 27th, he was brought in on grand larceny charges that were later discharged. 1928 had been a lucky year for Abe, but it would end on a sour note when he was found guilty of violating his parole and sent to Sing Sing to complete his sentence from the 1925 shooting of Ethel Moran. But if you think the streets of Brownsville suddenly became safe because Abe was in jail, you're sadly mistaken. You see, Abe and his boys were small-time, stick-up boys. Another group of Jewish gangsters held sway in Brownsville. Hailing from East New York, Maya Shapiro and his older brother Irving had control over lucrative slot machine rackets, shylocking, gambling, bootlegging, and they were trying to muscle their way into the poultry union. Irving was 4 years older than Maya, and he at one time was a well-respected professional boxer. Maya too dabbled in the sweet science, but never went past amateur. Now, most historians will tell you that Abe Reles worked for the Shapiros before going to jail. I don't see any evidence of that. All right. They make it seem like the Shapiros had been running Brownsville for years. The truth is, Maya was only 22 in 1930. He didn't get his first arrest until 1928. And to me, it seems like Abe had his thing going on, and the Shapiros had their own thing going on. At least until 1930. While Abe was away, Maya Shapiro did become the power in Brownsville. Along with his brother, they had built a gambling operation that stretched from Brownsville to the Catskills. All right, now let's start to undo some of these myths about Abe Reles and his gang. All right, the history books and every documentary will tell you that Abe worked for the Shapiros and went to jail because of some work that he did for them. And when he got out, he decided he wanted to be the boss. So he reached out to Harry Strauss, Bugsy Goldstein for help. And then they go meet with Happy and the Dasher and ask them to join to take on the Shapiros. They'll also tell you that they were introduced by Louis Capone. But the fact is, Abe and Happy were already associated. They were arrested together on August 28, 1928 for gun possession. A policeman saw them loitering at Schenectady Avenue and Union Street. When they couldn't explain to the cops why they were there, he arrested them for vagrancy and found that they were both packing. Abe gave his name as Abraham Reles, and they were released on $3,000 bond. So here's what I think happened, based on what I read and all the research that I've done. When Abe got back from Sing Sing, he came back with some connections. He had access to slot machines through somebody in the Bug and Meyer circle. And him and his gang, including Big Harry Strauss, Bugsy Goldstein, combined with Happy and his guys who they already knew to run that operation and come together on shylocking and other illegal activities, forming what they called the combination. But whatever it was, Maya didn't appreciate the incursion into the territory that he considered his. But Abe and his boys didn't see it that way. They had been robbing and stealing in Brownsville since Maya was in short pants. Why should they give a damn what he thought? The combination made the first move. On June 3rd, 1930, 3 weeks after Abe got out of Sing Sing, Maya Shapiro was standing in front of a cafeteria at 457 Sutter Avenue, talking to a pal named Lazar Elliott. When two cars came screeching to a halt, 4 men got out of the vehicle and shots rang out. Maya was struck in the abdomen and Elliott got a bullet graze in his scalp. The newspaper reported that the Brownsville gangster would die, but Maya pulled through. Shortly after midnight, on June 11th, 1930, Abe was with Bugsy Goldstein, Louis Esperidi, and a guy named George DeFeo. Now, George DeFeo was a man who had been arrested with Happy Mayone once before, and he was part of the combination. The men were driving through Brooklyn and pulled in front of a candy store and went inside. They went inside to use the phone, purchase some cigarettes, and collect some slot machine receipts. While they were inside, someone came up to the car and flattened the tires. When Abe and his boys came from inside the store, they noticed the flat, and as DeFeo was inspecting the damaged tire, a sedan pulled up and shots rang out. Lead flew from a Thompson submachine gun. DeFeo dropped with one in the head and died instantly. Abe tried to run but was hit in the back. Bugsy Goldstein almost got his nose blown off by a bullet. The shooters raced into the night. DeFeo was pronounced dead at the scene, and Reles and Bugsy were taken to the hospital and charged with murder. But this was just a technicality used by the police to hold them for questioning. The war was on. Abe didn't take long to heal because he was back in the papers again on July 26, 1930. Abe was arrested again for murder, but this had nothing to do with the rackets. While driving, Abe Reles jumped a curb and killed 74-year-old Bertram Dorman with his vehicle and then fled the scene. This was the first time he had killed a person. This one was an accident. The rest would not be. He was again acquitted. Around this time, Maya Shapiro decided he wanted to send a message to Abe, and he knew just how he wanted the message delivered. He drove around Brownsville until he found Abe's girlfriend and forced her into his car. He held her for 24 hours, beating and sexually abusing her. And then he dumped her in the street and told her to tell Abe who did this to her, as if Abe needed another reason to kill Maya Shapiro. In January of 1930, Joseph Silberman was an up-and-coming boxer whose ring name was Joey Silvers. He was labeled as Brownsville's sensational Hebrew welterweight. By August 1930, he was dead. You see, Joey Silvers wasn't just a boxer. He was involved in the rackets, and he was with the Shapiros. Some say he was the one who gave info on Abe and got George DeFeo killed. Others say he tried to kill Happy Mayon. Whatever the reason, the combination marked the pug for death. On August 27th, Joey Silvers was driving down Shepherd Avenue near Blake Street in Brownsville when another car forced his vehicle off the road. Two men jumped onto his running board. One said, "Yesterday you were going to put me on the spot. Now I'm doing the same to you." And then shots rang out. 8 shots were fired at the fighter, one grazing his heart. The gunmen jumped back into their car and fled the scene. Silvers was still alive and conscious when the cops arrived. The police found a loaded .45 revolver in his jacket. Guess he never had time to pull his piece. At the hospital, Joey was told he was going to die, and then he identified his killers and expired the next day. The police brought in Maya Shapiro as well as Abe Reles and Happy Mayon, but all were released. On September 3rd, 2 weeks after Joey Silvers had his gloves hung up, a man named Samuel Cohen was shot dead. Samuel Cohen worked with Joey Silvers and the Shapiros. That night, Samuel Cohen entered a soda shop at 1595 Pitkin Avenue, owned by another Cohen named David, no relation. Samuel Cohen pointed to 2 slot machines and said, "Who put that machine in here?" And before giving David Cohen a chance to reply, he said, "Take it out. I put one of my own in here." Again, he demanded to know, "Who put that in here?" Just then, a well-dressed man, described as tall and handsome, came into the shop. Just as Samuel was demanding to know the owner of the slot machine, the handsome man drew a pistol and shot Samuel Cohen once in the head. He then turned his gun on the 30 or so patrons and said, "Stay where you are or I'll blow your heads off." 19-year-old Joseph Gavin tried to leave and caught a slug in the elbow. Everyone else got the message. As the shooter was leaving, Lewis Fisher, a hospital employee, was coming into the shop. The shooter, I guess we could say who it is. Tall, handsome, cold-blooded killer. This is Pep. This is Harry Strauss, Pittsburgh Phil. As Harry was making his getaway, Fisher was coming in. Pep took no chances. He shot Fisher once in the chest. Then Harry Strauss calmly walked across Pitkin Avenue and made his getaway. The 3 wounded were taken to the hospital, where Samuel Cohen died on the operating table. The other 2 survived. Now here's something I didn't know, and maybe you didn't know it either. All right, so Samuel Cohen didn't arrive at the soda shop alone. All right, he was driven there by Maya Shapiro, who stayed in the car while he sent Samuel inside to threaten David Cohen. But Maya left the scene when he saw Pep walk into the store, and he left his associate to die. So you see, you're only gonna get this type of info here at A Few Bad Men. All right, the boss has got the skinny for you, so just stay here, stay tuned. I got you. Okay. Maya and Irvin were arrested. They were found together asleep in the bed they shared at the family home. Both were brought in for questioning, but were released. Like I said, the Shapiros had business in the Catskills, and early on the morning of July 11th, 1931, the brothers, along with their pal, Smokey Epstein, were returning from Monticello, where one of Maya's guys was dealing with an assault case. Maya decided he wanted to spend the night at the Turkish Baths instead of the hot flat at 691 Blake Avenue the brothers shared along with the entire Shapiro family. Mother, father, 2 sisters, and a young brother, Willie. We'll talk more about him later. Irvin agreed, but first he wanted to go home and grab a fresh pair of clothes and say hi to the family. Abe and the boys had laid a trap for the Shapiros. They found out about the brothers going to the mountains and decided to wait for them at the house. Abe and one other man, Pep or Dasher, entered into the vestibule and unscrewed the only light bulb in the small hallway, hid and waited for the brothers to appear. At 3:25 a.m., Smokey and Irvin pulled up into the front of the Shapiro home. Irvin told Smokey that he would be right out in a minute. He was going to change his clothes and then they could head back to the baths. Irvin crossed the street, flicking a cigarette into the gutter, and walked up the stairs leading to the vestibule. When he entered the vestibule, it was dark, and as he fumbled with his keys, shots rang out. 2 men fired 12 shots at Irvin, 10 of which made it home. Smokey Epstein said he heard the shots and saw his friend drop in the hallway. 2 men then ran from the building. Smokey took off and returned with a policeman. They found Irvin Shapiro dead. Witnesses reported seeing a car parked around the corner with 5 men sitting in it for hours before the shooting. 1 Shapiro down, 2 to go. Now, I know I never talked about Willie Shapiro, the youngest brother. I'll get into that later. I'm going to do a Shapiro Brothers video, so stay tuned. So I know I'm kind of skipping over the Shapiros, but don't worry about that. I'm going to clear all of that up. All right. Even though Irvin was dead, the real target was Maya, and the combination boys would not rest until he was gone. So less than 2 weeks later, on July 19th, 1931, Maya Shapiro was leaving a card game at 3 a.m. He was headed to get something to eat with Smokey and 2 other pals when a car pulled up and shots rang out. Abe Reles, Frank Abindato, and Harry Strauss opened up on Shapiro with a shotgun and a .38, but missed. But unluckily for the combination boys, a cop was nearby and he heard the shots. He called for backup and gave chase. The police fired over 30 shots at the fleeing shooters, while Abe and his boys tossed the guns out of the window. After a 2-mile chase, the boys crashed the car and were taken into custody. They were charged with the death of Irvin Shapiro. The charges were dropped, and they were rearrested for grand larceny and gun possession. The car they were in was stolen. After the DA was forced to admit that he had no more evidence, Samuel Leibowitz insisted his clients be let go, and the men were freed. It seems Maya got the message, and he made himself scarce in Brooklyn. He was hiding out on the Lower East Side. But a pal of his didn't leave Brooklyn, at least not on his own. Sammy Silverman was another former prizefighter and a friend of the Shapiros. On August 6, 1931, 3 men entered a restaurant at Pennsylvania and Livonia Avenues. They approached Silverman and ordered him to come with them outside, where they pushed him into a car and he was never seen again. Maya was in hiding, but the war was not over. Abe almost found out the hard way, because on August 31st, 1931, Abe was standing outside of a pool room on Sutter Avenue when a car pulled up and shots rang out. 38 shots peppered the pool room, shattering the windows of the store next door, barely missing the clerk and the 6 women he was serving. The car sped east on Sutter Avenue, barely avoiding the kids at play in the street, but Abe was unharmed. 3 days after the shooting, Abe was arrested along with Bugsy Goldstein, Harry Strauss, Tony the Sheik Carrillo, and Happy Mayone. They were pulled over by a cop. Although no weapons were found, the cops arrested the men anyway. They were held on suspicion of burglary. Everyone but Abe Reles got bail. The judge deemed him a human target. But a few days later, he was back on the streets too. But not for long. The police had removed the key from the key ring of Martin Goldstein, Bugsy Goldstein, back when he was arrested last. The police trailed Goldstein, Reles, Mayone, and Strauss to a Turkish bath at 602 Cleveland Street. The cops used the key to open a locker and they found 2 bags. The first bag contained 338 caliber revolvers, 332 caliber revolvers, and a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun, all clean, oiled, and loaded. In the other, they found 1,000 rounds for the revolvers and 150 shotgun shells with 90 slugs in each shell. The gang was arrested again in the bathhouse and held on vagrancy charges without bail. Little side note, this is the same day that Salvatore Maranzano got killed in Manhattan. Right. Maya Shapiro was now spending his time on the Lower East Side. There are some reports that he had some dealings with Legs Diamond and the Catskills, but at this time, Legs was big in the papers and they connected him with everything. Anyway, on September 17, 1931, Maya was walking and talking with a guy named Dewey. What Maya didn't know is that Dewey had betrayed him, and he was working with the combination and had orders to kill Maya if given the opportunity. Dewey felt this was the right time, and as the pair were walking, Dewey slowed his pace slightly and pulled the gun, and shots rang out. Maya was hit once behind the ear. Dewey loaded Maya's body into a truck and dumped him in a dirty tenement on the Lower East Side, ironically next door to where Johnny Silkstocking was found a few weeks earlier. 2 Shapiro's down, 1 to go. I'll get to him in the next episode. But for now, Abe in the combination with the Kings of Brownsville, Ocean Hill, and East New York. But some Italian gangsters were just coming together to form some kind of criminal government led by a guy named Charlie Lucky from Manhattan. And if they wanted to keep control of what they had fought so hard for, they would have to be connected. And that's where I'm going to have to leave you guys off at. All right, that was episode 1 of Murder Incorporated. Just make sure you ring that bell so you don't miss episode 2. All right, so make sure that you take that subscribe button for that ride and leave his body in the streets. Break that thumb. I want him on a liquid diet for the next 2 months. All right, this has been A Few Bad Men. Keep your nose clean and don't take any wooden nickels. I see you in the funnies.